Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast here in Washington, D.C., I'm the newsman, Sam Sachs. It's the Friday show. Good morning to everyone, except humiliation pig Jim Jordan, who, after losing 2 votes to be Speaker this week, is refusing to drop out of the race and instead wants to hold more, losing votes. So, whether it's a quest for power in the halls of Congress or running cover for a college wrestling team doctor who sexually abused kids, Jim Jordan never backs down. And we begin at the White House, where President Biden gave a primetime address Thursday night to convince Americans that it's in our national interest to get involved in 2 major wars and possibly a third. The administration is seeking $100 billion from Congress to fund primarily security assistance and weapons transfers to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. Biden claimed the money is a, quote, smart investment for the future, as though the U.S. hasn't been dealing with decades of blowback related to prior decisions to flood war zones with weapons. He tried to link Hamas, Russia, and Iran all together as enemies of democracy, even though in the case of Russia and Hamas, the conflicts couldn't be any more different. And most troubling in President Biden's jingoistic remarks is that he tried to drag the U.S. labor movement into this imperial project.
Patriot missiles for air defense batteries, made in Arizona. Artillery shells manufactured in 12 states across the country, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, and so much more. You know, just as in World War II, today patriotic American workers are building the arsenal of democracy.
All right, you're just describing a war economy there and reminding the nation that one of the few industries in which Americans actually still build things is weapons manufacturing. And you can't call it an arsenal of democracy when you want to use the weapons to defend an apartheid state. Anyway, Axios reported that tens of thousands of artillery rounds that were supposed to be shipped to Ukraine will now be diverted toward pounding Gaza ahead of a ground invasion by the Israeli Defense Forces. The shells are actually stored in Israel, but can only be accessed by the U.S. military. Earlier this year, the Israeli government approved a request to draw down supplies to send them to the front lines of Ukraine. But in the last week, that all changed. And at the request of the Israelis, the Pentagon is reversing that and giving the IDF access to the cache. The 155 millimeter artillery shells create a wide range of damage, so their use in densely packed places like Gaza City will surely result in even more civilian casualties. Already, the damage inflicted on Gaza by the IDF is extreme. According to an analysis of satellite imagery by The Economist, the IDF has, in just a little over a week, destroyed or damaged more than 4% of the buildings in Gaza. 11,000 homes, apartments, towers, shops, offices, places where 92,000 people lived, now turned to rubble. And a Washington Post analysis found entire residential blocks in Gaza wiped off the map, including places of worship. On Thursday, the IDF bombed the oldest church in Gaza, the Greek Orthodox St. Porphyrius Church, which was built in the 12th century. It was badly damaged in an airstrike as it was sheltering Palestinians fleeing the bombing all around Gaza. There are reports of extensive loss of life and injury. The IDF admitted it targeted a Hamas command and control center nearby and that the church was collateral damage. The Israeli government no longer even pretends to care about civilian lives, including Israeli and American hostages, nor the future of the Palestinian people. Israel's economy minister, Nir Barakat, told ABC News about the pending ground invasion of Gaza that it could take a year, and that while there will be some effort to rescue hostages and avoid civilian death, the, quote, first and last priority is destroying Hamas. And Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen explicitly said the plan is not only to destroy Hamas, but to also shrink Gaza to steal more land from the Palestinian people, which would explain the strategy of razing buildings that were homes to tens of thousands of people. They are never meant to return to their homes. It's an admission that the IDF plans to carry out a second Nakba, in case anyone is still unclear about where all of this is headed. But it does appear a lot of Americans are clear about it, and they're disturbed by it. Some fairly remarkable new polling out of CBS and YouGov shows, for the first time, major cracks in the U.S. population's support for arming Israel's occupation of Gaza. A majority of Democrats and independents polled said that the U.S. should not send weapons to Israel, and 70% of Democrats and a majority of independents supported sending aid to Palestinians in Gaza. In fact, overall, a larger percentage of Americans support providing aid to Palestinians than support providing arms to Israel, 57 to 48%. So that's one bit of good news we can take with us into the weekend. The U.S. political class may be willing to assist in a genocide in Gaza, but the majority of Americans are not. So go enlist in the IDF, Joe, and leave us the hell out of it. For the last few years, we've been seeing the headlines about companies getting hit with fines for illegally employing kids. The so-called disruptions to the labor market caused by the pandemic, which were really just workers coming to realize how much they're worth and demanding more to do dangerous jobs, that led employers to seek cheap labor elsewhere. Teenagers, particularly unaccompanied migrants. And conservative state governments assisted the exploitation by passing laws to relax their child labor protections. Well, now we have some official data on the situation out of the U.S. Labor Department, and in the fiscal year 2023, there were more child labor violations recorded than in any other year going back nearly 2 decades. In this chart, you can see the number of children who were employed illegally in the United States this fiscal year surging to 5,792. That's an 88% increase since 2019, before the pandemic. The Labor Department reported that it conducted nearly 1,000 separate investigations into child labor violations last fiscal year, and that it has more than 800 probes still currently underway. Also, the total fines administered to companies surged by 83% over the previous year, as capitalists weighed the cost benefits of putting kids to work illegally and decided the potential for profit outweighs the cost of a fine, which is a maximum of just over $15,000 per child, which is pocket change for some of these companies that got busted. We're talking about McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Subway, Tyson Foods, just to name a few of the firms that exploited children last year. There is legislation currently pending in Congress that would increase fines for child labor to over $600,000 per case, which might actually force Capitol to reconsider its strategy here. But the bill is currently stalled out due to heavy opposition from business interests. Those same lobbying groups, like the Chamber of Commerce, have been heavily involved at the state level in legalizing certain forms of child labor. These people want to hurt kids for profit. Sick stuff. Okay, what the fuck's going on at Instagram? 2 real head-scratcher stories coming out of the social media platform that leave you wondering if it has a close working relationship with the IDF. First, 404 Media reported that an auto-translate feature on Instagram was classifying individuals who had a Palestinian flag in their bio in the phrase Alhamdulillah, which just means praise God. They're being classified as terrorists. For real, Instagram translated the bios to mean instead, quote, praise be to God, Palestinian terrorists are fighting for their freedom. One user experimented a bit and found that when just the phrase Alhamdulillah was used, the auto-translate gets it right as thank God. But when the Palestinian flag is added, then the translation added, quote, Palestinian terrorists. Instagram, which is owned by Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, apologized for the erroneous translation and claimed to correct the problem. It did not say how such a glitch happened. In another bizarre story, this one reported by The Intercept, photos of the Gaza hospital bombing from earlier this week were censored on Instagram and Facebook and flagged as content that was, quote, too sexual. What? Unfortunately, these are now just two freak occurrences that fit in a pattern of censorship and suppression of information coming out of Gaza. As The Intercept reported, quote, since Hamas's surprise attack against Israel on October 7th and amid the resulting Israeli bombardment of Gaza, groups monitoring regional social media activity say censorship of Palestinian users is at a level not seen since May 2021. Instagram and Facebook users inside and outside of the Gaza Strip have complained of deleted posts, locked accounts, blocked searches, and other impediments to sharing timely information about the Israeli bombardment and general conditions on the ground. Worth mentioning, there are deep connections between Meta and Israel's tech sector. The company is investing a lot of money in Israeli startups that it once believed would serve as the backbone of its metaverse. And many of those same tech CEOs are now actually preparing to go into combat in Gaza, serving in the IDF. So is it possible that Meta has chosen a side in this conflict and is orienting its platforms to assist that side? Yes. Yes, it is. In fact, that's exactly what's happening. One day, if we win, there will be no rich dicks. But today isn't that day, so here we are. Some great nominations on social media this week. Several here for Genocide Joe Biden. I sympathize with the feelings, but like I said last week when Netanyahu was nominated, the shit they're up to is almost too depraved for this segment. Here's a nomination for Ford Motors Executive Chair Bill Ford for whinging about the UAW and how it won't end its strike. It's not how this works, Bill. You have to offer your workers a fair contract first to end the strike. Let's see. How about a nomination for Peter Thiel, who, according to Business Insider, is an FBI informant? Yeah, he reportedly was informing on foreign individuals involved in Silicon Valley investments. This was based on claims made by conservative blogger Charles Johnson, who, according to rumors online, once pooped on the floor in college. I have no interest in verifying if that's true or not. Here's a strong nomination from our friend Chris. Celebs who are doing apologia for genocide in Gaza. We should single out comedian Sarah Silverman, who posted on Instagram a defense of shutting off electricity and water to millions of people, claiming Israel doesn't need to provide these life essentials to Gaza, especially for free. Thing is, Gaza has been under siege for nearly 2 decades by Israel, so it literally can't get this stuff anywhere else. So yeah, Israel does sort of have an obligation here, unless it's intent on committing genocide, which it is. Silverman later deleted the post and claimed she was too high when she initially shared it. Let me say, as someone who gets high a lot, that's not an excuse. And of course, we have a nomination here for all the goddamn landlords from you know who. Thank you, Arona. We spent a lot of time considering all of these candidates. They're all very strong, but in the end, we went with someone else. This week's Rich Dick is Alicia Finley. She's not rich. Well, she might be, I don't know. But she serves the interests of the ruling class. And based on prior precedent in this segment, that qualifies. Finley is an editorial writer at the Wall Street Journal. She's also a frequent guest on conservative media. And she crapped her pants last Sunday after watching a speech by our friend Cooper Caraway, a labor organizer who's been a guest a few times on this show. First, here's a clip of what Cooper said at a pro-Palestine rally in New Haven, Connecticut last week.
Our bosses, our government want us to think that their enemies must be the enemies of working class people, but they are not. Our enemies are not in Gaza. Our enemies are the CEOs who are cutting our pay and benefits. Our enemies are the politicians who lock our people up and leave them to sleep on the street. Our enemies are not in Gaza. Our comrades are in Gaza.
Damn, well said. And Cooper's absolutely right. And it's useful for the working class to know where to divert their energy and who are their allies. All of it makes sense. Unless you're a depraved ghoul who works at the Wall Street Journal. Finley brought attention to the remarks and equated them with former President Trump's infamous claim after Charlottesville that there were fine people on both sides. She also went on to call Cooper an anti-Semite, which is a grotesque smear against someone that I, an American Jew, consider a friend. Showing solidarity with oppressed people in Palestine is not in any way anti-Semitic, and to claim that American Jews are obligated to support Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign just because it's a so-called Jewish state is anti-Semitic in itself. The Jewish people are not a monolith. Anyway, back to the editorial. After smearing Cooper, Finley then went on to claim that Israel has this amazing free market not because it exploits Palestinians, but because it sucks off Silicon Valley investors. Quote, often referred to as Startup Nation, Israel now leads the world in venture capital per capita. While it still has relatively high individual income taxes and heavy business regulation, its social welfare spending is lower as a percentage of gross domestic product than that of the US and most European countries. Israel also spends more of its GDP on defense than any other developed country, a necessity in a hostile neighborhood. Honestly, that sounds like an awful place to be. To libertarians, it might be a paradise. To normal people, though, it's fucking Omelos. But the attack worked. The article brought national attention to Cooper, and since most of the political and pundit class in this country is total garbage, he faced a significant backlash over his remarks. Even Democratic Governor of Connecticut, Ned Lamont, joined in on the pile-on, calling Cooper's speech insensitive. And by Thursday, Cooper was submitting his resignation to the SEIU. When asked by a local news outlet if he had anything to say about the matter, Cooper responded, quote, "The only comment I'll be making about this episode is all power to the working class." Cooper will be fine and will be doing bigger and better things before no time, I'm sure of it. As for Alicia, she'll continue writing shitty articles for the Wall Street Journal that make oligarchs feel better about themselves. Alicia Finley, she's this week's Rich Dick. Okay, friends, the show ends this morning with a sunrise from Wisconsin. It was sent in by Adam from Lake Monona in Madison. Enjoy. Thank you, Adam. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please, if you haven't yet, sign up for Means TV and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. One day, capitalism will fall. Until then, we'll be right here. See you next week.